Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the silk-draped chambers of an ancient Chinese palace. It's just before dawn. The moon's still sulking on the horizon, and the palace grounds are barely touched by the lavender tint of morning. But inside, something's already stirring. You can smell it before you see its scents of steamed rice, roasted sesame, a trace of plum wine on the air so delicate it could vanish if you blink too hard. You're not royalty, not quite, but you've been summoned. Maybe you're a visiting scholar, a minor noble, or someone important enough to be tolerated. Today, you're invited to observe the Emperor's breakfast, not eat it. Of course, don't get ahead of yourself, but you can watch and smell. And maybe, if no one's looking, taste a spoonful of rice kanji on the edge of the tray. You probably won't survive this if you mess up the bowing protocol or sneeze in front of a jade goblet. But hey, no pressure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing all the time zones swirl together like a big sleepy dumpling soup dot. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The palace is already awake by the time you shuffle into your embroidered slippers. The servants have been up for hours, lighting lanterns, heating water, soaking herbs, slicing vegetables so thin they're nearly transparent. Outside the grand kitchen pavilion, where dragons are carved into every beam, and golden tiles line the roof. The cookmaster is already barking orders. You hear the clang of bronze pots, the hiss of rice wine bubbling in woks, the sharp rhythm of cleavers tapping in tandem like an orchestra of metal chopsticks. You pass through a corridor so polished it reflects your robe's hem like a pond. A eunuch delicate, stern, and somehow always just slightly behind, you waves you forward. You nod, eyes low, as you're ushered to the viewing platform. From here, hidden behind a gauzy silk curtain, you can peer into the Emperor's private breakfast chamber, and there he sits, on a raised dais, robed in yellow color reserved for emperors alone. His eyes are half-lidded, not quite awake, but the table before him tells a different story. 16 lacquered trays, each painted with cranes and bamboo, are arranged just so. Each holds a tiny portion of something, a curled lotus bun, translucent and warm. A bowl of fish porridge with chrysanthemum petals floating on top. Sticky rice shaped like a coiled dragon tail. You watch in silence as he lifts the first bite. With ivory chopsticks so thin you'd be afraid to breathe near them. The rice glistens. He chews slowly. A eunuch tilts his head. Another takes notes. Yes, breakfast is being recorded .c in ancient China. Breakfast wasn't just about nourishment. It was ceremony, performance, a show of stability. If the emperor eats well, the empire sleeps well. If his kanji is watery, someone loses a finger, maybe two. Historians still argue whether this ceremonial display was primarily political or religious soul, both or neither. But the stakes were real. You lean forward, tempted to scratch your nose but resisting, because even the slightest rustle might draw attention. Another tray is presented. Candied olives with gold leaf, not edible goldworm. Actually, yes, edible gold, but meant more as a metaphor for eternal rule. You squint. One olive drops into a tiny porcelain dish. He ignores it, possibly a test. The Emperor's personal taster, sitting at a smaller table beside him, takes small bites first, as always. It's a thankless job. You live in a palace, but may drop dead from improperly aged vinegar. Yet the man looks calm, experienced, probably hasn't fainted since last winter. What's most fascinating is the silence. No clinking, no slurping, no conversation. Just the barely audible shuffle of silk robes, the quiet exhale of incense, and the rhythmic clicking of ivory against porcelain. The Emperor doesn't speak, not yet. Not until the final dish. Only then does he signal approval. A single nod so subtle it could be mistaken for a nap spasm. And with that, the morning's decisions begin. Breakfast for emperors wasn't a leisurely thing. Often, it was the only quiet moment they had before the petitions, the judgments, the punishments, the bureaucracy. Imagine trying to enjoy your sesame bun while your court advisors hover with scrolls about tax reforms in the southern provinces. Not ideal, but still, there was comfort in the routine. 1,000 moving parts orchestrated to deliver 24 bites, none repeated, each symbolic. You can't help but marvel at how something so small as a curled radish garnish could carry metaphors about prosperity, long life, and the balance between yin and yang. You feel your stomach growl quietly, and hope no one heard it echo off the tile. Back behind the kitchens, a team of chefs, some of whom have never even glimpsed the Emperor, prepping the second round. Bird nest soup, fermented bean curd, boiled peanuts with osmanthus petals. Some emperors preferred sour flavors in the morning to stimulate digestion. Others favored sweet, especially in the Tang Dynasty, when candied fruits were all the rage. And still others, like spicy Emperor Xuanzong, was known for adding hot mustard to his morning dumplings. Historians still argue whether that's because of regional preference or undiagnosed heartburn. One scroll from the Song dynasty even mentions a breakfast wine infused with snake bile. It was said to grant mental clarity, or possibly terrifying dreams. The record cuts off mid-sentence. You suspect that's not a good sign. You lean back, allowing the scents to wash over you one more time on us. Ginger, roasted barley, and realize how surreal it all feels. Somewhere between art, ritual, and survival. This breakfast isn't just about what's eaten. It's about what it means to eat. And you're just the observer, the dreamer in the curtain's shadow, lucky enough to witness the day's first bite. You're still lingering near the curtain when a soft breeze trails through the corridor, carrying the warm scent of rice. Not just any rice, imperial rice, grown from seeds blessed by court astrologers, irrigated by redirected mountain streams, and harvested only when the moon hangs in a particular slant. It's the star of the Emperor's breakfast, but it's not alone. Today, as with every morning in the palace, the emperor is presented with all 5 of the sacred grains. You follow the aroma toward the preparation hall, where giant stone mortar thump rhythmically. Inside, chefs are steaming, fermenting, pounding, and grinding the 5 ancient grains that, according to Chinese cosmology, were the building blocks of civilization: rice, millet, wheat, barley, and soy. Sounds simple until you realize that each grain had its own imperial gardener, its own astrologically preferred harvest day, and its own fleet of servants just for husking. Rice, of course, reigns supreme. It's fluffy today, freshly steamed in bamboo baskets, its surface dotted with pink and yellow chrysanthemum petals for purity and fortune. The millet, finely ground, has been shaped into little cakes the size of a coin and fried lightly in tea oil. The barley is boiled down into a kind of grainy pudding that's more symbolic than edible, like those decorative soaps people keep in guest bathrooms. The wheat rolled flat and wrapped around minced duck and pickled plum, creating a tiny scroll-like roll that feels both poetic and mildly chewy. And the soybeans, ever versatile, are presented as tofu cubes steeped in ginger broth. Their surface trembles with every footstep. You try not to breathe too hard, but why these 5 grains? According to Han Dynasty texts, the 5 cereals were divinely chosen. Their balance was said to mirror the 5 elements: fire, earth, metal, water, and their consumption promoted harmony within the body and the realm. Which sounds nice until you remember that harmony sometimes involved purging, sweating, or the occasional medicinal leech. Historians still argue whether these 5 grains were selected for their nutritional value or their symbolic meaning. Some claim the ritual began with ancient agrarian festivals and was later co-opted into court life. Others believe it was more bureaucratic, early form of food regulation masked in divine approval. You lean toward the latter when you see one poor servant trying to smooth out an oddly lumpy millet dumpling before the food taster arrives. The emperor, meanwhile, samples each grain with monk-like detachment. His chopsticks dip lightly into the barley pudding. He tastes it, swallows, and then lets the eunuch beside him record the outcome on a scroll. Every morning, a grain report is filed. You suspect it's more detailed than your country's budget plan. There's a kind of reverence to it all, like the grains aren't just food, they're a legacy. The fields they came from may lie thousands of li away, tended by families who've never seen the capital, who wouldn't dare look the emperor in the eye, but would spend 3 years preparing a single crate of soybeans in hopes it might appear on his breakfast tray. One fringe account from the temps era claims that a court alchemist once tried to invent a 6th sacred grain by crossbreeding barley and rice. It didn't go well. The resulting hybrid, nicknamed moon wheat, was apparently edible only to horses and, even then, reluctantly. The alchemist disappeared shortly after. No one asked too many questions. You take a moment to observe the emperor's posture. Still straight, still solemn. Breakfast isn't a time for chatter. His fingers, thin but steady. Don't tremble. That's good. A shaking hand could be misread by the court as weakness, or even illness, a ripple that could send nervous governors into rebellion. Yes, even the way he holds a chopstick sends messages across the empire. You hold yours like salad tongs and decide you'd never survive a day here. The next tray arrives. This one, a quiet tribute to the farming calendar. A seasonal rice porridge, dyed faintly green with young tea leaves and sweetened with date syrup. The taste, you're told, mimics the feeling of first spring wind brushing across a wheat field. You find that oddly specific but poetic dot. Every dynasty had its preferences. The Han favored the 5 grains in pure forms. The Temps made them luxurious, mixing them with pine nuts, lotus seeds, even a rare moss that grew only on sacred cliffs. The Ming, they innovated with frying oils and egg-based batters, creating breakfast versions of dessert. One emperor apparently insisted on having rice cakes shaped like celestial animals, new one each day. The kitchen staff lived in perpetual terror of running out of mythological inspiration. This morning, though, it's all about balance. You spot a sesame barley cake next to a tart pickled tofu cube, sweet beside salty, soft beside crunchy, every flavor paired, every grain symbolic. You catch the eye of a young servant holding a tray and see the panic there. One of the sesame cakes has slightly slumped. It will be rejected, or worse, corrected by a very angry ladle. Just then, a eunuch whispers something in the emperor's ear. You don't catch the words, but the emperor's eyes flick briefly to the side. Is he displeased with the tofus? Was the barley pudding too stiff? Or did someone miscalculate the lunar rice infusion? It's impossible to tell. His face returns, too neutral. The breakfast continues. There's a certain comfort in this ancient choreography. While the world outside may be chaotic rebellions, weather disasters, nomadic threats, inside this chamber, the grains arrive on time. The chopsticks move with grace. The emperor eats, and the empire watches. And you're just beginning to understand that breakfast here is never just breakfast. It's a meditation, a symbol, and a delicate gamble played out in porcelain and steam. The steam curls lazily from the trays now, like dragon breath trapped in a teacup. You feel it warming your cheeks as the next wave of dishes glides into the room with eerie silence, balanced on the outstretched arms of servants, trained never to shuffle, never to flinch. If one tray were to drop, it might as well be a declaration of war, at least a strongly worded letter from the Minister of Ceremonial Harmony. Your eyes lock onto the centerpiece of this morning's third course, a delicate dish of bird tongue, porridge pale as moonlight and about as mystical. Yes, bird tongue, not chicken, not duck. These are tiny, near microscopic tongues, plucked ethically, questionably, from birds that were supposedly bred solely for their oratory muscles. You're not sure if that's possible, but here we are. The porridge is glutinous, creamy, and served in a shallow jade bowl, so translucent it glows faintly green in the morning light. Beside it, on a raised lacquered tray, is a steamed swan. Egg cracked delicately at the top like a soft-boiled sculpture. A porcelain spoon rests beside it, clearly made for dainty hands, not your clumsy fingers still bearing ink stains from yesterday's calligraphy lesson. The emperor leans in. His movements are precise, ceremonial. He tastes the porridge first, just a sip, no visible reaction. Then the egg. He slices through the white with a thin spoon, revealing a yolk so orange it looks painted. A whisper runs through the eunuchs nearby. Apparently, that shade of yolk means the swan was fed goji berries. A very good omen. You marvel at how breakfast here feels like decoding a secret language, one built on textures, temperatures, and colors rather than words. A soft porridge might suggest the emperor seeks peace. A firm one, maybe readiness for military action. Historians still argue whether these interpretations were deliberate symbols or post hoc superstition cooked up by anxious officials. Either way, people paid very close attention. The bird tongue porridge, surprisingly, has a rich cultural lineage. It was considered a delicacy in several dynasties, particularly the Ming, when mouth virtue was seen as a path to clearer speech and thought. The belief was that consuming the tongue of birds, especially songbirds, might enhance the emperor's own voice, giving strength to edicts and clarity to decrees. Or, perhaps more practically, it was just another rare thing to eat that no one else could afford. A scroll from the Qing era even describes a dramatic breakfast scene in which an emperor refused to eat his bird tongue porridge because the tongues were cut too wide. Pomade, he claimed it offended the poetic balance of his morning meditation. The chef who prepared them was reassigned to canal dredging, which in ancient China meant mud, mosquitoes, and several poetic regrets. On your own table, more modest, tucked behind a low screen, you see small tasting bowls have been placed for guests and scribes. It's not the emperor's portion, of course. Yours is chilled, possibly yesterday's leftovers. But you try it anyway. The porridge melts on your tongue, subtle, warm, and ever so slightly sweet, like a memory of something comforting you can't quite name. The texture, though if we're being honest, says closer to overcooked tea, APIOCA. Next, your host motions toward the swan egg, gently rotating the tray. You nod politely, even though you've never eaten anything laid by a swan and aren't sure where to start. The spoon cracks through with surprising ease. The yolk is dense, almost creamy, infused with saffron and something herbal maybe, angelica root, or possibly just something the kitchen staff refuses to disclose. You're told that in some dynasties, swan eggs were reserved for solar equinoxes, as they symbolized celestial order and grace. The shape echoed the heavens. The color mirrored the sun. In the Song dynasty, a swan egg's position on the breakfast tray could signal to ministers whether the emperor was pleased with recent military strategies. Swan egg on the left, good. Swan egg on the right, prepare to update your will. You can't help but think how fragile this all is. A cracked yolk, a cold spoon, a crooked chopstick, and suddenly a general is demoted or a poet is imprisoned for treasonous metaphors. It's a breakfast table balanced on superstition and strategy. A servant now lights a coil of incense near the emperor's dais. It's subtle but sharp sandalwood blended with aged tea leaves and dried pear blossom. The scent is supposed to aid digestion, but it smells more like something you'd wear as cologne if you wanted everyone in the market to know you had money. The emperor, still eating, signals gently with 2 fingers. A eunuch approaches with a silk hand towel embroidered with the symbol for tranquility. The emperor dabs his lips. Another signal. The jade dish is removed and replaced with a smaller lacquer boxwatch. Inside remains a mystery for now. As you watch, it becomes clear that every action, every flavor, color, textures, part of a broader conversation. And you, still hunched awkwardly on your cushioned stool, are struggling to keep up. What began as a simple meal has become a philosophical performance. In a corner of the room, an elderly scribe with a long wispy beard begins sketching, not words drawings, diagrams of the emperor's hand movements, the tilt of the bowl, the steam trails rising like spirits. These illustrations will be compiled later into a document called the Morning Harmony Scroll, distributed to high-ranking ministers as a way to read the emperor's mood. Whether this actually works is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether these documents had real influence or were just elaborate palace busywork. Either way, somewhere out there, a general is nervously decoding a drawing of half-eaten swan egg and wondering if war's been declared. Meanwhile, you sip a second spoonful of bird tongue porridge and try not to think about where exactly they got all those tongues. A quiet rustle stirs the silken partitions as the next course glides in no clangs, no clatter, just the soft pad of slip, peat, and the gentle whisper of brocade brushing polished tiles. This time, the trays carry what the court calls the heavenly beasts, a poetic way to refer to the imperial breakfast proteins. You might call it ... meat, but that would be missing the point entirely. Front and center on the lacquered platter is a slice of steamed venison, pink and tender, perfumed with osmanthus blossoms. It's nestled beside 2 small cubes of wild boar jerky, marinated in a mix of soy, cinnamon bark, and fermented bean paste, and flanking the plate like little culinary bodyguards are skewers of pheasant breast, grilled over jujube wood and brushed with plum glaze so glossy you could check your hair in it, if you had any left after sleeping on those stone-hard imperial pillows. The emperor does not rush. He never does. He raises his chopsticks, not the ordinary kind, mind you, but ivory-tipped and carved with tiny dragons. Chasing Cloudsand selects the venison first. It glistens slightly as he tastes. A quiet pause, then a nod. No words. Still, that nod will likely be immortalized in 6 calligraphy styles by lunch. The meat served to emperors wasn't just about taste. Oh no, it was cosmic, spiritual, symbolic. In ancient Chinese philosophy, different meats were aligned with different energies yin and yang, hot and cold, fast and slow. Venison, for example, was said to strengthen the Shenda spirit, making it ideal for a ruler with heavy decisions. Pheasant, that brought clarity and fortune. Boar, raw strength, but tempered through preservation, as though to say, I can be fierce, but I am patient. Historians still argue whether these meat pairings were truly rooted in Taoist principles, or if palace chefs just wanted to show off. One theory suggests the choices reflected the emperor's political needs, serving boar during border tensions, for instance, or pheasant during agricultural blessings. Another scholar once proposed that the emperor simply enjoyed variety and had the power to make anything symbolic. Honestly, that one feels more realistic. You glance at your own tray, tucked discreetly behind the painted screen. Today you've been gifted a small chunk of pheasant overcooked and rather stringy. Still, you chew it dutifully, hoping that clarity and fortune will come anyway, preferably before your next tax audit. As the emperor dines, another tray appears. This one filled with decorative condiments, yes. Even his sauces are curated. There's aged soy thickened with black garlic and honey, a piquant chili paste made from hand-crushed Sichuan peppers, and a curious paste of ground fish bladders and magnolia buds. That last one, you're told, is believed to sharpen dreams. Not that the emperor can afford dreams. He dreams for the empire, not himself. There's even a Tang's Dynasty text that advises emperors not to indulge in their private dreams, as it may divert spiritual energy away from the mandate of heaven. That's like being told not to blink in case it causes a drought in the West. You're reminded of a bizarre historical footnote. During the Zhou dynasty, one particularly austere emperor banned the consumption of meat entirely during spring. Not for dietary reasons, but because spring was the season of rebirth, and eating flesh was considered a spiritual offense. The kitchens adapted by creating meatless meat mok, venison made from pressed mushroom and yam, shaped and colored to deceive even the strictest astrologer. Apparently, the emperor never found out, or if he did, he respected the lie. The emperor dips his pheasant skewer into the garlic soy glaze and takes a slow bite. A eunuch records something on a bamboo slip. It's unclear whether he's tracking approval or digestion. You've stopped asking. Meanwhile, a side dish arrives. Silken duck liver custard. It looks like a tiny golden cloud in a porcelain bowl, topped with a single goji berry. According to the servants, it's both luxurious and medicinal. According to your face, it's a texture you'll never get used to. Still, you watch as the emperor samples it without flinching. His taste buds are trained or possibly numbed by years of expensive culinary diplomacy. There's even a tale most certainly evasion of an emperor who once smelled a slightly off pigeon breast and executed the chef before dessert arrived. That story's often followed by the caveat that the chef was, in fact, a political rival, and the pigeon was merely the pretext. In palace politics, even breakfast could be weaponized. The protein course always ends the same way, with a ceremonial sip of hot deer antler broth, served in a tiny jade cup and held between the fingers like a fragile treasure, said to invigorate the blood and calm the nerves. It's a tonic brewed for 9 hours, stirred clockwise and strained through silk. If you're lucky, your version was strained through cheesecloth and not someone's leftover laundry rag. Take a sip. It's earthy, oddly warming, like drinking melted wood with a side of forest myth. The Emperor's breakfast is nearly halfway done now, and yet he remains upright, composed, unspeaking. You realize with some unease that this entire ceremony has gone on longer than most weddings. But here, food isn't fuel. It's governance, it's ritual, it's theater, and every bite is a message. From beyond the screen, you hear the court. Astrologer whisper something about key imbalance and rooster moon rising. You don't know what that means, but based on the nervous way a kitchen attendant scurries off, it probably means someone's about to reheat the pheasant. The steam has softened now, hanging in the air like a warm sigh. A light breeze from the silk fans on either side carries the faintest scent of jasmine and broth. It's time for the grains and roots course what you, in your humble kitchen, might call carbs. But here, in the shadow of the jade dragon columns, starch is serious business. To eunuchs, bring in a polished stone tray engraved with the 8 trigrams. Atop it rests a series of miniature ceramic bowls, each filled with a different preparation. Baize, millet, barley, sorghum, and the more exotics, lotus root starch. You count at least 7 varieties of kanji, from sweet to savory, thick to watery, and even one with a strange gelatinous sheen that suggests it was cooked for hours, until the rice gave up all sense of individuality. The Emperor lifts a spooner, long-handled one made from tortoiseshell and silver. It's said this particular spoon was designed to detect poisons by reacting with toxins and changing color. Whether it works or not, no one really wants to test it. One official famously dropped dead the moment he picked up the wrong spoon at a banquet, though historians still argue whether it was poison or just a very unfortunate fish allergy. The Emperor dips the spoon into the first bowl, red millet kanji, slow-cooked with jujubes and a trace of pine pollen. This was the go-to breakfast for the Western Zhou court, favored for its warming energy and ability to stabilize mood. Probably helpful when you've got 5 provinces threatening to revolt before noon. Across the tray is a barley porridge with pickled turnip. It smells sharp, like rain on iron, and is meant to improve digestion. Next to that sits a sticky black rice pudding, made sweeter with persimmon syrup and finished with toasted melon seeds. The symbolism is layered: black rice for longevity, persimmons for clarity of judgment, and melon seeds for fertility. The Emperor, notably, avoids that last one today. Perhaps a diplomatic message to some nosy concubines. Your own small bowl arrives. It's millet plain, slightly overcooked, with a single goji berry floating in the middle like a red eye. You chew slowly, wondering if you're supposed to interpret this. Is the Emperor watching? Is this a test? Should you compliment the goji berry or bow to the rice? The servants refill the Emperor's teeth, this time with a white chrysanthemum infusion, cooled to the exact temperature believed to activate its key balancing properties. You're told the petals were picked during the second autumn moon under strict silence. Why? To preserve the flower's purity, of course. Or maybe someone just didn't want to listen to the foragers complain about mosquitoes. One bowl catches your attention more than the others. A lotus root starch pudding, served cold in a pale blue dish. The texture is slippery, like jelly, but the flavor is earthy and floral, according to your neighbor, the court librarian, who seems to know everything. It's meant to cool the body and settle overheated emotions, which is imperial code for don't yell at your advisors. Today, the emperor eats all of it, a subtle but clear signal. You notice a curious moment. A scribe walks across the room with a painted board and quietly switches out one of the seasonal paintings behind the emperor's seat. It had been a plum blossom, a scroll. Now it's bamboo. The librarian leans in and whispers, "The bamboos for humility and flexibility." The plum was too forward. A new rice bowl is quietly removed. Clearly, breakfast isn't going according to mood. Today it's going according to messaging. And just when you think this course can't get any more elaborate, a eunuch appears carrying what looks like a bamboo-wrapped brick. He unwraps it ceremonially to reveal pressed sweet rice, shaped like a phoenix. It's studded with candied ginger and colored with natural dyed saffron for gold, butterfly pea flower for blue, crushed red bean for a gentle crimson. Not food, art, edible poetry. This dish, you're told, is only served on days the emperor reviews military reports. The phoenix represents rise and rebirth, signaling hope for peaceful victories. Whether it tastes good is secondary, though the emperor seems to enjoy it, slicing a wing off delicately with the edge of his spoon. You reach for your barley again, but the texture has gone rubbery. Someone refills your tea, this time with smoked rice water, traditionally drunk by laborers to boost energy. You're not sure whether to be grateful or offended. Then comes a moment of silence. No trays move, no spoons clink. The emperor has closed his eyes, holding the spoon midair, not asleep, meditating. This is the breath between bites. A moment described in court etiquette books as vital for harmonizing digestion with divine stillness. Try that next time someone rushes through breakfast at your house. Historians still argue whether this pause was truly for health or simply to give scribes enough time to record notes without missing the next dish. In some dynasties, it lasted exactly 100 breaths. In others, it was timed to the sound of bamboo water clocks dripping behind screens. Finally, the silence breaks. The emperor taps the spoon twice on his bowl, a signal. The grains and roots tray is lifted reverently, as though it contained the bones of ancestors rather than boiled starches. And you lean back, full in spirit, if not in stomach, already sensing the next round coming. The morning sun filters, pin now, warm and amber, catching the steam that still lingers in slow curls. Breakfast is only halfway through, but you're beginning to understand. It's not just a meal, it's a map, as the grains are carried off and silence drapes the room. Once more, the light shifts just slightly through the carved lattice windows. Outside, you can hear the faint chirp of morning crickets giving way to the softer sounds of sweeping brooms made of bundled reeds brushing against palace stone. But in here, inside this grand hall of stillness and intention, the air grows, fragrant with something new, fruit and flower. This course, deceptively delicate, is as calculated as a military maneuver. It begins with the arrival of a wide platter carved from a single piece of white jade. On it, arranged in concentric circles, are slices of seasonal fruits, but not just any fruit. These have been curated like royal courtiers, tested, polished, carefully chosen, and judged on color, texture, aroma, even astrological compatibility. Dot at the center is a carved winter pear, shaped like a blooming peony. You'll notice the knife cuts dini, almost invisible, and you're told it took the palace fruit carver nearly 4 hours to achieve that effect. That same pear, when eaten with ginger syrup, is believed to soothe coughs, calm the heart, and improve the voice. Perfect for an emperor who delivers decrees and, occasionally, poetry. Beside it, glowing like little moons, are lychees, peeled and cooled on marble to preserve their dewy sheen. These were famously imported fresh from southern provinces, using relay riders who rode all night-risking horses, bandits, and occasional monsoons, just to keep the emperor's palate amused. Historians still argue whether these extreme deliveries were common practice or carefully staged myths to showcase imperial might. Personally, you're leaning toward both. There's also honeydew melon soaked in rosewater, slices of persimmon dried over cedar smoke, and delicate wedges of citrus from citron tangy, fragrant, sliced paper-thin, and fanned out like dragon scales. The colors alone would give a modern wedding buffet a nervous breakdown. Then come the candied flowers, served in tiny glass saucers shaped like lotus leaves, chrysanthemums dusted in sugar, plum blossoms preserved in honey, and jasmine petals infused with syrup and dried in shadow. These aren't simply snacks, they're tonics for the soul, each one aligned with a particular emotion, virtue, or seasonal ailment. Plum blossoms to promote resilience, chrysanthemums for clarity, jasmine for gentleness in speech. You eat one cautiously. It tastes like perfume, regret, and a faint whiff of enlightenment. Not all emperors appreciated the subtlety. One early Han ruler famously demanded only mangosteads, despite their rarity declaring all other fruits inferior. The mangoes had to be shipped overland from India, which often resulted in a half-frozen mess by the time they arrived. But no one dared complain. A concubine once made the mistake of suggesting peaches. She was reassigned to counting bricks. In the eastern annex, your tray, less extravagant, holds a modest slice of Asian pear and a single sugared osmanthus, flour pressed between thin rice paper. Chew slowly, pretending it means something deep about your inner peace. A nearby attendant offers to refill your tea, this time with orange blossom water, known to soothe anxiety and prepare the stomach for the next course which, judging by the smell wafting in will be warm and deeply spiced, but not yet, because no flower course would be complete without the ritual of the imperial scent bowl. This is a covered bowl of hot water, infused with floating petals, herbal smoke, and a drop of essential oil today, sandalwood and magnolia. The emperor lifts the lid, closes his eyes, and simply inhales. This is not an act of pleasure, but put an imperial ritual to center the breath, to breathe through the empire. As the old poets said, you mimic the motions, hoping no one notices that your bowl has only plain tea with a stray hair floating in it. There's something soothing about this pause in the meal, where sharp spices give way to sweetness, and you begin to understand that flavor here is layered like meaning in a riddle. One court record mentions an emperor who refused to taste anything that wasn't grown in soil where scholars had once walked, whether he believed it affected the key of the food or just wanted an excuse to eat expensive melons remains unclear. Still, this philosophy survives in strange ways. Take the snow grapes, for example, tiny, nearly translucent fruit grown on frost-prone vines, harvested precisely at dawn, said to carry the essence of morning. These were once reserved only for the solstice breakfast. Today, a small bunch rests on the emperor's tray, nestled in crushed ice. He eats 3, not 4, never 4. That number's considered unlucky, too close to the word for death. As the fruit course winds down, a scribe steps forward quietly and adjusts the emperor's armrest, slipping in a cushion embroidered with clouds and cranes. It's a small touch, but even it carries weight. The crane symbolizes longevity and wisdom. It's probably just a sore elbow. But here, in the palace, everything has symbolism. Even your slouching posture probably means something. And then, without fanfare, the emperor's plate is cleared. The last few petals taken away, the pear blossom centerpiece removed. A bell chimes in the distance, not to end the course, but to signal the transition. A soft chime, more air than sound, like a memory fading. You take one final sip of your now lukewarm tea and settle back slightly. Your stomach isn't full, but your senses are. The fruit and flower course has done its job not to feed, but to remind you of balance, of beauty, of how even sweetness must be curated, chosen, and timed. Because in this palace, even a slice of pear speaks volumes. And just as the sweetness lingers on your tongue, the scent of something rich and brothy begins to weave into the air, signaling what comes next. The soups of emperors, a soft clatter-lacquered bowls meeting silver trays, echoes gently through the hall as the next course glides into place. This time, the scent tells you everything before the servers do. Broths, bone-deep and layered with centuries of theory, make their entrance in silence, as if not to disturb the wisdom floating just under the surface of each bowl. It's time for the soup course, or as palace insiders sometimes call it, medicine disguised as lunch. The emperor's bowl is a marvel. It's carved from nephrite jade, reputed to keep liquids warm longer, and align the soup's energy with heaven's breath. That last part may be a bit of creative mythology, perhaps a sly marketing ploy from the artisan guild, but either way, it works. Steam rolls upward in elegant spirals, carrying with it the scent of ginseng, dried shiitake, wolfberries, and turtle shell. Yes, turtle shell. Don't make that face. You glance down at your own humble bowl, more like a small ceramic cup. Inside floats a thin radish and seaweed broth, which is honestly refreshing, subtle, and mineral-like, the way rain might taste if it soaked through a forest. It's said to wake up the internal rivers, though you suspect that's code. For this will send you running to the chamber pot in 20 minutes. Back to the Emperor. He raises his spoon knot, a plain metal one this time, but carved sandalwood, smoothed with time and wear. It absorbs heat and flavor, but never burns the tongue. The spoon dips into a broth known as 8 Immortals Tonic, a rich golden liquid that supposedly channels the spiritual energy of Taoist sages. It contains deer, antler velvets, snow fungus, dried abalone, and a dash of aged plum vinegar for sharpness. Historians still argue whether the tonic had real medicinal benefits, or whether it was the placebo effect in the shape of dinner. Then again, if your placebo has deer antler and costs more than a horse, maybe it's working. The servers rotate trays now. Each bowl is labeled with a discrete wooden tag indicating its function: mind clarity, lung strength, spirit nourishment, and, charmingly, harmonize the liver. You're tempted to sneak a sip of that last one, just in case. Last night's rice wine wasn't fully processed. A hush falls again. Not the sacred silence of ritual, but a don't choke silence. These broths are not to be rushed. Every ingredient has a function, a history, and sometimes a backstory weirder than you expect. Take the black chicken herbal soup, for example. It's made with silky chicken, yes, the fluffy ones with the blue-black skin, boiled with angelica root, longan fruit, and sometimes even dried chrysanthemum. The color is unsettling, but it's long been believed to replenish yin energy, especially for emperors who've spent too much time yelling at ministers or chasing immortal elixirs. You spot another bowl being placed before the emperor, this one with bird's nest soup, prized for centuries and harvested from the hardened saliva of cave-dwelling swifts. Yes, really. The nests are melted into a delicate gelatinous broth, then flavored with rock sugar or ginseng. The taste, mild, almost neutral, but its reputation, legendary. It was believed to promote youthful skin, clear the voice, and bring favor with the heavens, a triple win for any ruler. Of course, not every emperor loved it. One Tang Dynasty sovereign banned it from court, calling it slippery disappointment in a bowl. He preferred beef tendons to heartier, bolder, and less saliva-adjacent. But like all things in palace life, preferences were often about more than taste. They were politics in a bowl. You sip your own broth again. It's cooled slightly now, and you notice the threads of seaweed curling like calligraphy at the bottom. It's oddly soothing. Around you, other courtiers are similarly quiet, sipping with slow reverence or calculated nonchalance. No one wants to appear too eager or too unimpressed. Soup, you learn, is a delicate theater. One eunuch appears at the side of the room, carrying a steam basket filled with miniature dumplings swimming in brother, surprise edition. Deserve phoenix eye dumplings, shaped like flower buds and filled with minced shrimp, daikon, and mushrooms. Served in a light stock made from bamboo shoots and dried scallops. They're both hearty and ephemeral. The emperor eats one and nods. Once the tray is immediately withdrawn, as if his approval has made the dish obsolete. As the bowls begin to empty, you hear a low gong in the distance. Not a command, but a digestive bell, used to mark the halfway point of breakfast and signal time for the next tea infusion. You hadn't realized how many sips you'd taken until now, and your body feels oddly buoyant, as if the broths have not just warmed you but recalibrated you. A side servant sets down a small plate with a sliver of ginger pickle, carved into the shape of a crane. Not for decoration, ginger is meant to close the soup course, sealing the stomach to prepare for what's next. You chew it slowly, savoring the spicy sweetness, feeling it coil warmly down your throat. You glance at the emperor again. His face is calm, focused, as if he's just read 1,000 scrolls in one spoonful. Or maybe he's just thinking about dumplings. Either way, the course is done. The trays are cleared. The bowls vanish like mist, and the room resets. But in that space between courses, a realization stirs in you. Every spoonful is a story, by a memory, a spell cast in broth, and the next one. You smell it already, earthy, meaty, rich with the promise of indulgence. Ah, yes, the meats are coming. The scent hits you before the servers even reappear a warm, savory whisper of smoke and roasted fat, laced with a hint of star anise and something faintly citrus. It curls through the air like an invitation you didn't know you were waiting for. You straighten a little in your seat, already imagining what's coming next. It's time for the course. Everyone, not just you, but even Emperor secretly, waits for the meats now. Forget everything you know about the word roast, because in this hall, meat isn't just roast, it's painted, pampered, anointed, and slow-cooked over charcoal from peach trees so rare they have name. The first dish to arrive is imperial roast duck, lacquered in a glaze of mortars, soy, and aged rice wine, then air-dried for hours before being roasted in a clay oven that's been seasoning since your ancestors had ancestors. The emperor's portion is carved tableside with such delicacy you could weep. Each slice is exactly the width of a bamboo leaf. The skin crackles so softly, it's like a polite compliment. You hear the quiet click of his jade chopsticks as he lifts one perfect piece and dips it gently in a tiny dish of osmanthus scented vinegar. He chews once, twice, then pours, not because he's thinking about the flavor, but because he knows everyone's watching his reaction like farmers watch the sky. You, however, are given a more humble bowl, a few slices of soy-braised beef, shank, served cool and shiny in its own gelatin. It's surprisingly tender, marbled with history, and seasoned with 5-spice and just a flicker of Sichuan pepper. The tingling sensation on your tongue reminds you that even the simple dishes here are clever in ways your own cooking will never be. Next comes wild boar stew, brought out in a stone pot that still sizzles. The meat has been marinated in rice, wine, and hawthorn berries, then slow-cooked with lotus root and fermented black beans. This is food from the empire's forested borders, tribute from hunters who risked arrows, storms, and imperial tax collectors. Historians still argue whether boar was truly a staple or a prestige item saved for rare banquets. But let's be honest, you don't stew boar for 6 hours just to eat it alone. You hear soft murmurs as the next dish is revealed. Deer with cassia bark and figs, once reserved for the autumn equinox. This preparation balances heat and sweetness. The meat is lean, almost crimson, and so tender it yields at the mere suggestion of a bite. The sauce is sticky, fragrant, and flecked with gold leaf. Not for taste, gold doesn't taste like anything, but as a reminder that even in chewing, an emperor must be dazzling. Somewhere near the emperor's dais, a low clink signals a change in utensils. Out come the ivory-handled knives used for slicing the phoenix clawswitch. Despite the name, are actually chicken feet simmered in rice wine and medicinal herbs. Don't grimace. These are considered delicacies for their texture and are said to lubricate the joint, say wiggle slightly as they're lifted, which may explain why you conveniently drop your chopsticks just in time to avoid a portion. Your saving grace arrives on a small lacquer tray, smoked duck egg with a strip of cured pork belly wrapped around a stalk of pickled mustard. It's humble compared to phoenix claws, but somehow it hits just right. Salty, smoky, and sharp, like the culinary equivalent of a witty proverb. One of the more unusual items presented is camel hump, braised and sliced into jelly-like slabs, rich in collagen. This was once favored by emperors seeking to preserve their youth and restore. The harmony between the muscles and breath, whether it worked or not, is unclear one. Ming Emperor famously ate it every week and still looked 50 by the time he turned 30. But the legend lives on, also on offer, for those deemed worthy. Is bear paw soup once considered the pinnacle of strength and virility? Controversial even then, it's a dish that split courts. One scholar warned that consuming it would burden the soul with wilderness sorrow. Another insisted it gave him the strength to finish the Confucian classics twice in one night. Historians still argue whether these claims were medicinal, metaphorical, or just overcooked hype. You're not offered bear paw. Honestly, you're relieved to cleanse the palate between bites. Tiny vinegar-soaked lotus petals are passed around, and attendants offer soft cloths scented with orange peel and sandalwood. Preuse gently to your mouth, not from etiquette, but to keep from moaning out loud over a particularly well-cooked piece of soy-braised gooseneck at the far end of the hall. A team of musicians begins to play a soft, slow zither melody. Pre-entertainment, but digestion. Ancient belief held that certain scales could calm the spleen and support digestion. You wonder if they ever tested this theory on someone who just ate boar, duck, and deer in the span of 10 minutes. Eventually, the meats begin to disappear. Trays are lifted like magic. Dishes retreat in perfect synchrony. And what's left behind is not just full bellies, but the faint, comforting fog of roasted memory, warmth in the bones, a sigh in the stomach. You lean back, hands loose on your lap, and notice the Emperor doing the same. His gaze is unfocused, dreamy. Perhaps he's full. Perhaps he's dreaming of roast duck on a celestial lake. Or maybe he's just calculating how many tribute geese he can request this spring. Either way, the meat course is done. You exhale. Softly, the heavy lifting of the meal has passed. And now, something softer arrives, a course made of roots, grains, and quiet comfort. You lean forward just slightly, your stomach still humming from the indulgent orchestra of meats. But as the trays return, their mood has changed. No more crackling skin or gilded glazes. This course arrives like a whisper after a parade. Modest bowls, quiet colors, soft aromas. It's the grains and roots now. The Emperor's breakfast must follow the principles of balance. And after so much fire and richness, it's time for Earth's nourishment disguised as simplicity. Your own bowl is filled first. A warm porridge made from millet, jujube, and lily. Bulbs slow-cooked to the consistency of satin. It smells faintly sweet, like damp straw and distant honey. And as you scoop up your first spoonful, you're surprised by how deeply comforting it is. The jujube melts like jam, while the lily bulbs provide just a hint of snap. This is not food meant to impress. This food meant to restore. The Emperor, of course, receives his porridge in a porcelain vessel rimmed with pale green glaze, said to represent the jade rivers of heaven. His version includes black rice, pink nuts, lotus seeds, and a thread of osmanthus syrup drawn in a careful swirl over the top. Each grain is perfectly whole, having soaked overnight, then been steamed over fragrant bamboo water infused with cassia bark. The tradition of porridge, or joe, goes back thousands of years. Historians still argue whether it was originally peasant food elevated by the court, or imperial fare imitated by the masses. But by the time you were born, it had become sacred in its own way. Morning meditation in a bowl. Around the hall, the atmosphere has shifted. Courtiers eat slowly, carefully, as if trying not to disturb the texture of the moment. A few older officials lift wooden spoons to their lips with closed eyes, as though the porridge is helping them remember something they've forgotten, a song, a childhood face, a dream where they didn't have to wear court robes. Then comes the sorghum, caked lightly, pan-toasted, chewy, and dotted with dried plum. It's handed to you on a thin bamboo plate, wrapped in a dried lotus leaf to keep it warm. A small brushstroke of fermented bean paste has been hidden inside the whey. A letter might be tucked into a robe pocket. You bite into it and get a burst of umami and surprise. It's delightful, in a grandma knew what she was doing kind of way. Meanwhile, servers present the emperor with glutinous rice balls filled with sesame and citrus peel, floating in a clear broth scented with almond and apricot kernel. These are served only when his mood is deemed harmonious, a daily judgment whispered between eunuchs and astrologers alike. You can't help but wonder how they decide that. Do they check his dreams, his bathroom habits, his mood when his left shoe gets tied? A gentle scraping sound reaches your ear as a tray of steamed taro with chestnut paste makes its way toward the dais. The emperor's portion is shaped into the form of a chrysanthemum, each petal a slice of root brushed with ginger honey. Yours is plainer, but just as fragrant. As you chew, the natural starchiness blooms into a floral sweetness, and you suddenly understand why taro was considered a food of scholars, earthy yet profound. You steal a glance at the emperor. His spoon pauses mid-air as he inspects the layers of his rice bowl. There's something mesmerizing about the way the black grains contrast with the pale lotus seeds. Maybe he's pondering his ancestors, or maybe he's just trying to remember whether he likes lotus. Somewhere in the corner of the room, a servant lights a coil of mugwort incense, meant to help settle the spleen and keep the stomach from gossiping. You smile at that phrase. It's one your own mother used to say, usually after an overly generous dinner. You inhale. The scent is herbal, slightly bitter, and oddly bracing, like the tail end of a thunderstorm. Now comes sweet potato in honeyed soy, roasted until caramelized and sticky at the edges. In the Song dynasty, these were sold by street vendors as snacks. For students taking the civil service exams, the emperor's version is served with a pinch of dried orange blossoms, believed to sharpen memory and clear the path of mental fog. You make a note to find some before your next palace exam. Another tray glides past, this time bearing multigrain steamed buns, dyed soft pink with beet juice and dusted with crushed almonds. The buns are small, warm, and soft enough to tear open. With a single thumb pressed, you catch a whisper of rose water, a reminder that even bread can be elegant when made with imperial hands. Historians still argue whether these lighter, root-based courses were meant to slow the appetite or test the diner's character. Eating meat boldly might show strength, but savoring grain with patience showed wisdom. The emperors who lived longest often favored the latter. Then again, one famously long-lived empress allegedly survived on goat soup and fried eel skins. So maybe moderation was just a theory. As the root course winds down, you begin to feel it not the fullness of excess, but the quiet satisfaction of completion. These dishes don't shout, they don't dazzle, they whisper things like you've done well, and let's rest now. They bring you back to earth. The servers begin clearing trays once again, gently stacking bowls with barely a sound. What remains is a subtle sweetness in your mouth, a warmth in your chest, and the quiet promise of something even lighter to come. And just like that, the final flavors of breakfast begin to stir fruits and teas, preserved surprises and final sips meant to close the morning like a curtain drawn across a stage. You lean back, grateful. The roots have steadied you. Now it's time to end the show. As the root dishes fade into memory, you notice the scent of something brighter drifting toward you: citrus, flowers, and just a hint of fermented mystery. The mood of the hall shifts once more, like a gentle breeze rearranging the morning. Gone are the heavy trays and steaming bowls. Now, attendants glide in with trays carrying lacquered boxes and slender porcelain cups. The final act of this imperial breakfast is ready. Fruits and teas. The soft exhale after a long, delicious breath. First comes a small dish, barely the size of your palm, bearing candied kumquats glossy, sun-bright jewels that sparkle in the light filtering through the silk curtains. You lift one delicately and bite. The skin is sweet, the flesh tart, and together they jolt your taste buds back into focus. You feel more awake, more present. It's almost rude, really, after all the effort put into lulling you into sleepy satisfaction. The kumquat is a cheeky little slap. The Emperor receives a slightly grander version. Slices of fresh winter pear soaked in chrysanthemum wine, arranged in a spiral around a carved dragon fruit blossom. The pears shimmer like frosted glass, and you can smell the floral wine from where you sit. A whisper reaches your ears. These pears were grown in a special orchard in the north, watered only by melted snow and plucked during the third day of frost. Whether that's true or not, no one questions it. When it comes to imperial fruits, myth is half the flavor. You're handed a cup now small, warm, and made of thin porcelain, so translucent it seems to glow. Inside, a steeping infusion of bitter orange peel, dried osmanthus flowers, and young green tea leaves. The scent is light and sharp, like waking up to a clean breeze through an open window. You sip slowly. It's slightly bitter, slightly sweet, and entirely soothing. You can feel your body nodding in agreement. The Emperor, of course, has options. His tea is brought out in stages. First, a snow chrysanthemum tea, prized for its ability to cool the heart and brighten the spirit. Then, a small cup of Dragonwell green tea, poured from a jade-handled kettle. Finally, a rare aged pu'er, so rich and dark it looks like ink. Historians still argue whether pu'er was reserved for elders due to its earthy strength, or for warriors preparing for battle. Either way, it's served with a gravity that borders on reverence between sips. Small snacks appear like interludes in a gentle musical piece. You try a bite of preserved loquat, soft and golden, with a tangy syrup that lingers just long enough to make you smile. Then dried persimmon, flattened like coins and dusted with rice flour to keep them from sticking to your fingers. These are nostalgic snacks, ancient even to the ancients. It's said that Confucius once praised the persimmon for its patience. It ripens slowly, sweetens with time, and demands no attention until it's ready. A servant offers you something curious, a translucent slice of what looks like glass. You hold it up and realize it's pickled ginger root, sweetened and dried into a delicate sheet. It crackles softly between your teeth and floods your mouth with warmth. Another servant follows with lotus seeds soaked in plum wine, which melt like snowflakes as you press them to the roof of your mouth at the emperor's table. There's a hush of excitement as the fruit pyramid is unveiled, a towering display of lychees, longans, mandarins, and mulberries, shaped to resemble Mount Pengli, the mythical island of immortals. According to legend, a single bite of fruit from that mountain could grant eternal life, or at least a long nap in a hammock. The emperor plucks a lychee, peels it slowly, and pops it into his mouth without breaking his serene gaze. It's a performance as much as a snack. You, meanwhile, receive a more modest plate-thin, slices of chilled melon arranged in a fan, each piece resting on a cooled jade tile. You eat slowly now, letting each bite dissolve before reaching for the next. There's nothing rushed in this course. This is the farewell hour of the feast, and every detail is designed to help you drift rather than depart. Then, a surprise. A servant kneels beside you and offers a tiny spoonful of fermented hawthorn paste, sharp, tart, and slightly fizzy on the tongue. It cuts through the lingering sweetness like a gong in the fog. This was once a remedy for indigestion, especially after large feasts. It's also incredibly tasty proof that medicine and pleasure don't always have to be enemies. For the final sip, a warm liquid is poured into your cup. This is jujube and goji berry broth, lightly sweetened with rock, sugar, and thickened with a whisper of snow fungus. The texture is soft and almost gelatinous, sliding down your throat like a lullaby. It's said to feed the blood, brighten the eyes, and calm the dreams. You can't confirm the first two, but the third, oh yes, you feel it already. A soft bell rings. The emperor sets down his final cup, and just like that, the meal ends not with a bang or a command, but with a breath. You glance around. The servers begin retreating like shadows at sunrise, trays vanishing into silk-curtained doorways. The air is still rich with fragrance, but the rush has faded. Only the quiet contentment remains. And you're not just full, you're centered, like a compass needle finally finding north. You've tasted fire, forest, field, and fruit, and now the body says thank you. Soon you'll be ushered out. Your seat will be swept. The dais will be polished. But for a few more moments, you sit still, holding the warmth of jujube broth in your belly and thinking. This is how mornings were meant to begin. You'd think the meal ends, their fruits nibbled, tea sipped, jujube broth glowing like the last ember of a small fire. But no, this is an imperial breakfast, not a peasant's porridge stop. And the ancients were nothing if not elaborate. There's one final component, less about nourishment and more about symbolism. This is where food turns into performance, and eating becomes an act of statecraft. The post-breakfast ritual bites. It begins when a wooden box is brought forward, carved with phoenixes and dragons in flight. A silk cloth is gently unfolded, revealing what look like simple rice crackers. Humble, really. But these are no ordinary snacks. These are heaven crackers, made with rice, flour, sesame, a dash of powdered ginseng, and moonlight. Poor, okay. Not actual moonlight, but the rice was harvested during a full moon, and the court astrologers swore that made it more auspicious. Whether or not the stars were involved, the crackers are delicate and crisp, with a hint of floral aftertaste, like they were brushed with the breath of orchids. You receive one on a thin jade plate and try it cautiously. It dissolves with a faint crackle, then fades, leaving behind the faintest bitterness, reminding you that even in sweetness, life offers restraint. A servant steps forward now with a small tray of 5 spice dates. They're not for eating. Not yet. First, each courtier must hold one in their palm for a count of 8 breaths, meditation of sorts. The warmth of the skin softens the date, just enough to awaken its oils. This tradition, said to date back to the Han Dynasty, is thought to balance the body's ki before court audiences begin. Historians still argue whether this practice had real medical grounding, or if it was just a dignified way to kill time while waiting for imperial bathroom breaks. You finally eat the date, and it's unexpectedly complex sweet at first, then tinged with clove, cinnamon, and a touch of Sichuan pepper that tickles your throat. It's a bite that lingers long after it's gone, much like the memory of a well-worded poem. The emperor's portion is identical, though his date has been hollowed out and filled with a paste of lotus seed and almond. Symbolism, again lotus, for purity, almond for clarity, both qualities expected in a ruler. He chews slowly, face unreadable. You wonder if he even likes dates, or if, like you, he's just trying to hit the emotional notes expected of him. Next arrives the ink egg. No, one knows quite where this tradition started, but it's older than the walls of the palace. A hard-boiled egg, dyed black with tea and ash, is brought to each diner, cracked lightly, then peeled to reveal a marbled pattern beneath the shell. It's oddly beautiful, like lightning frozen in time. You slice yours open and find the yolk dusted with salt and powdered dried plum. You eat slowly. The salt shocks your tongue awake again, even after everything you've just eaten. This is the point, they say, a closing jolt to ensure you carry the flavors with you into the day. The emperor is served his egg in a bowl of warm, salted water, where it floats like a moon in an inky sky. He picks it up with a carved ivory spoon. Deliberately, when he eats it, the court musicians shift to a lower key. It's so quiet you can hear the rustle of silk from 100 cloaks adjusting on benches. Then, in almost sacred silence, a single lychee wood toothpick is presented to each guest, not for the mouth, but to tuck behind the ear or into the folds of one's sash. This, apparently, is a holdover from the Tang Dynasty, when it was customary to carry the final meal's fragrance into the affairs of state. You gently slip the sliver of wood behind your ear, pretending it's not weird. Or, after everything else, why not? And now, at last, the bowl of departure. It's a clear soup of fermented tofu, white pepper, and spring onion, the ultimate contrast to the delicacies you've enjoyed. It's not flashy, not even pretty, But as soon as you sip it, something inside sighs. It's like being handed your shoes after a long opera. A subtle reminder that you've been seated long enough. One of the court scholars once wrote that this soup represents the end of indulgence and the beginning of duty. You could buy into that, or you could admit that it also helps settle, pour your overfed stomach. Historians still argue whether the departure soup began as a spiritual tradition or simply an elite version of a hangover cure. The emperor finishes his bowl. He nods not to anyone in particular, just a general nod of satisfaction. And with that, servers begin to retreat once again. Curtains are drawn back. Light floods in a little stronger now. The dining hall begins its transformation into something built entirely a place for politics, not porridge. As you rise, your robes feel heavier, and not just from the food. There's a weight to having eaten like this, the kind of weight that comes from stepping into the day after a dream. You smooth your sleeves, bow slightly toward the imperial dais, and begin to walk back toward your chambers behind you. Someone begins to chant a soft verse about the season's arrival. In front of you, the garden waits, bathed in morning haze. You step out into the gardens, and the crisp morning air greets your skin like silk cooled in mountain spring water, after the layers of scent and steam inside the banquet hall. This freshness feels cleansing, like you've passed through a temple. Off flavor and a merged reborn. You follow the stone path slowly, your hands still tingling from the lingering warmth of teacups and jujube broth. And although your belly is more than full, your mind begins to replay everything in slow motion, like watching ripples fade on a pond in imperial China. Breakfast wasn't merely a way to start. The diet was a philosophy served on porcelain. And in this quiet moment, as you meander through the dew-kissed bonsai groves and under weeping willows, you start to appreciate how much meaning was packed into every bite. Even the order of dishes was deliberate. From grounding grains to spirited teas, from yin-rich fruits to yang-fired stews. This wasn't breakfast, it was balance in edible form. Still, you can't help but chuckle when you remember your first dish, a dumpling shaped like a fish. Pretty symbolic, sure, but you bit into it upside down, and someone 2 seats away looked genuinely horrified. Never point a fishtail at the emperor, they'd whispered later. You survived. Barely. The scent of osmanthus still hangs in your hair. And every so often you catch the tiniest burp of 5-spice date, which sounds much more dignified if you call it residual essence. Honestly, you've never felt more imperially digesting in your life as you reach the edge of the garden. An elderly eunuch bows and gestures toward a low stone bench. Apparently, it's customary to sit the meal down, allowing your body to settle before tackling the day's tasks. You obey gladly, because frankly, your internal organs are still negotiating seating arrangements after that banquet. Seated beneath a blooming magnolia, you hear distant sounds, the rattle of court scrolls being unrolled, the careful stamping of royal seals, the unmistakable shriek of someone who forgot a ritual step. The business of empire marches on, powered by ink and ceremony, and crucially, very full bellies. That this was, in part, the point. Ancient Chinese emperors didn't eat alone. They shared their breakfast either literally or symbolically with the court, reinforcing status, culture, and the rhythm of the day. The meal wasn't just food. It was a demonstration of order over chaos, refinement over rawness. Even in a society that prized restraint, breakfast was allowed to be decadent because starting the day well was a signal that the realm itself was well-managed. And yes, there were contradictions. For example, while a Ming emperor dined on rice, steamed in gold urns, peasants just outside the city walls boiled millet in cracked pots. Historians still argue whether this culinary chasm helped reinforce loyalty or quietly bred resentment. Either way, the empire's cooks kept ladling, plating, and garnishing as if the fate of dynasties depended on the texture of a single dumpling. Pew, take in your surroundings now. Noticing a crane tiptoeing through the lotus pond, like it's been assigned the morning's choreography. The bamboo nearby rustles, and a servant walks past, carrying what appears to be a second breakfast for one of the emperor's younger sons, who apparently sleeps through his alarm. Spells on most days. Dot your own stomach amidst a tired gurgle, not of hunger but polite protest, as if to say, why did we eat the hawthorn paste after the third tea? You pat your belly gently and whisper, it's okay. The scholars disagree on the correct order too. A young scribe approaches, offering a scroll with a list of the morning's flavors written in classical verse. The poem is titled When Lotus Meets Lamb Before the Sun. It's actually quite moving, until you realize it's also a checklist for the imperial chef's records. Every flavor has been accounted for, every ritual noted. This, too, is part of the process, documenting the sacred meal so that future generations can study its elegance and copy it poorly with fewer budget approvals. Back in the palace kitchens, the fires are being extinguished one by one. The sticky rice pots are scraped clean. The peach wood ladles are washed and laid out to dry. A sleepy cook leans against the wall, sighs deeply, and probably wishes he could trade places with one of the chickens that just got excused from active duty. And somewhere, perhaps in the archives, perhaps in a half-forgotten recipe scroll, a note from an imperial chef who tried something unusual. Maybe he used tangerine peel instead of orange. Maybe he stuffed the dumpling with pine nuts and plum instead of minced duck. He was either rewarded with gold or reassigned to snow-shoveling duty on the Great Wall. Historians still argue over which dot you rise from the bench now, gently stretching your legs, every limb humming with contentment. It's not just that you ate like an empress, that you felt, if only briefly, like time slowed down, like the world in all its chaos paused to offer you a spoonful of lotus-scented calm. Tomorrow, you'll probably go back to whatever version of breakfast you call normal. Maybe cereal, maybe reheated dumplings that bear no resemblance to these celestial snacks. And that's okay. You'll carry this memory not in your stomach, but somewhere deeper, somewhere where the plum syrup lingers and the ginger still sings. You walk back toward the palace now, robes brushing against mossy stones, belly full, mind quiet. The day awaits. There's a quiet elegance to the palace as you step back inside. A hush that blankets the corridors now cleared of breakfast foot traffic. The ornate tiles are still warm from the morning sun, and the scent of sandalwood incense curls lazily along the vaulted ceilings. You follow the sound of low murmurs court. Officials are already gathering, their sleeves sweeping parchment scrolls, and their minds still somewhere between statecraft and soup. But for you, the afterglow of the imperial breakfast lingers like a pleasant fog. You're not the only one basking in the culinary aftermath. Inside one of the quieter wings of the palace, the imperial food scribes are already hard at work. Seated at lacquered tables, they transcribe the morning's dishes into ledgers, noting even the tiniest deviations from standard protocol. One scribe frowns as he jots down chef-altered crab, filling added persimmon seed. Emperor did not recoil. It's a good sign. In the high-stakes world of palace cuisine, a non-recoil is basically a standing ovation. Historians still argue whether these food logs were used strictly for culinary perfection, or whether they served as a sort of edible biography of the emperor's moods and temperament. Either way, these scrolls were sacred. A single misplaced note like mistaking lotus for lily could spell disaster, or, at the very least, a stern talking to from someone who takes their mushrooms extremely seriously. As you wander past the scribes, you hear soft chuckles and the occasional sigh. Food talk, it seems, has a universal power to relax people even, those who wield it like policy. One gray-bearded official is recounting how, during the reign of a particularly picky Song emperor, the palace chefs had to invent 88 unique variations of porridge just to keep the breakfast table inspired. One was made with rosewater and almond flakes, another with goose blood and pickled mint. A third was, apparently, just very well-salted water presented in a jade bowl. They called it simplicity porridge, and it was either genius or a subtle protest, the art of imperial breakfast. You come to realize wasn't just about pleasure. It was a language and edible dialect that spoke of power, harmony, status, and seasonal awareness. The emperor's choice to eat ginger-stewed pears in spring wasn't just personal preference. It symbolized the renewal of life when he opted boiled chestnut cakes in autumn. It reflected the kingdom's shift toward introspection and that tiny sliver of plum you savored earlier. It may have been nothing to you, but in court symbolism, it was a nod to endurance and survival. The plum tree blooms even in snow. You pause at a courtyard balcony now and look out at the capital beyond the walls. It's stirring. Market stalls are lifting their shutters. Oxen creak along stone roads. Somewhere a scholar is sipping his own breakfast tea knot from a jade cup, but probably a chipped ceramic one handed down through generations. He's reading the classics while nibbling a scallion pancake. And even though he's never been inside this palace, he shares something with the emperor, the quiet reverence of a morning meal. Because yes, while breakfast inside the palace involved rare ingredients, multi-course planning, and 2 attendants per dish, it ultimately fed the same needs: sustenance, calm, readiness. What separated the emperor's experience wasn't just wealth or power. It was performance, a public act of tasting that served as reassurance to all who watched. The kingdom is stable, the world is in order, and the man in charge just approved. The fermented tofu soup with an approving nod. Historians still debate whether this performance was more for the court or the emperor himself. Was he reminding others of his place, or reminding himself with each ritualized bite that he must embody balance and restraint? After all, if he indulged too much in sweet over sour, or heat over coolness, it could be read as an imbalance in governance. It's a heavy responsibility to place on a dumpling. You lean on the balcony rail and smile faintly. The memory of flavors still blooms on your tongue. The tent of hawthorn, the bracing ginger, the sleepy sweetness of almond paste rice balls. But it's the feeling that lingers most, the ceremony of it all. The fact that breakfast here isn't just a blur of clattering dishes, but a symphony with deliberate tempo, texture, and pause. And now, the empire moves forward. The emperor will step into his audience hall, perhaps still tasting the peppery finish of his ink egg. Ministers will bow, scrolls will be presented, decisions made. You'll do your part to whatever minor role you play in this grand, ever-churning wheel of dynasty and duty. But before that, before politics and paperwork, before the world calls you back to its demands, you close your eyes for just a moment longer. You inhale the breeze drifting over palace walls, carrying whispers of jasmine, smoke, and somewhere far below, the first notes of a street vendor's bamboo flute. You don't need more food. What you need is to remember how it felt to eat deliberately, bin stillness with reverence, to let flavor be not a rush, but a revelation. Back-faced, you realize, can be a kind of meditation. And with that, bell chimes for court assembly. Time to begin the next course of the day. You slip through the colonnade. The hush of the corridor gradually replaced by the murmuring voices of morning council. Scrolls unfurl like wings. Inkstones clink gently. But your thoughts are still adrift, carried on a current of memory and miso. Because today's council may concern borders, taxes, and weather reports. But let's be honest, you're still thinking about that smoked duck wrapped in lotus leaf. And so, as the bureaucrats recite grain counts and tax ledgers, you find yourself cataloging a different kind of abundance. The dishes, the flavors, the textures. The imperial breakfast was more than a meal. It was a masterclass in contrast and harmony. Crispy and tender, cool and warming, bitter and sweet. Everything balanced, everything meaningful, even now. As an official drones on about silkworm output in the southern provinces, your mind is looping one chewy mystery. How did they make that black sesame paste so silky? A question for the kitchen gods, perhaps. Boar maybe for the imperial chef, who, according to court whispers, once turned down a marriage proposal from a noblewoman because her taste buds lacked curiosity. Savage historians still argue whether chefs in imperial China had real influence, pair over court affairs. Some scholars suggest that certain chefs were so favored they had private audiences with the emperor. Others believe their status was closer to that of a well-fed servant, respected, but never truly powerful. What's clear, though, is that a chef could rise or fall with a single bowl. One badly steamed bun, and suddenly you're not slicing carp for the son of heaven, you're slicing cabbage on ice duty in Mongolia. As the council shifts topics, a scribe hands you a folded parchment day's imperial menu preview. Yes, dinner is already being planned. Apparently, a seasonal eel dish is being considered, served with chrysanthemum broth and candied bamboo root. You nod slowly, but inside, you're chuckling. 2 hours ago, you swore you'd never eat again. Now, you're just curious if the eel will be grilled or steamed. The emperor, seated on a raised platform surrounded by pale silk drapes, looks serene. He sips from a porcelain cup, not tea this time, but a ginseng tonic laced with honey. It's said that an emperor's energy must be maintained throughout the day. And while legends of morning martial arts and tiger hunting rides persist, the reality is far gentler. He paces himself like a professional brunchard as the discussion turns toward diplomatic gifts from the West. Your thoughts wander again, this time to a curious footnote you heard earlier, that the emperor recently tried a fruit from far-off lands strange, fuzzy orb called a kiwi fruit. Allegedly, it was too tart and reminded him of sour plum, but he was intrigued by its green center. Historians still debate whether this fruit really made it to the Forbidden City before the Qing era, or if this was simply one of many myths embroidered into imperial gossip. You stand now, gently excusing yourself from the council chamber. Nobody questions your executor role allows such flexibility, especially after a long ceremonial breakfast. Outside, you return to the servants' wing, where the palace staff are now scraping pans, stowing chopsticks, and gossiping in hushed tones about who got which dish wrong. A junior steward sobs softly because he forgot the coriander garnish on a rice porridge. He may never recover, but behind the scolding, behind the layers of formality, there is a quiet pride. These men and women crafted not just food, but moments, meaning little edible rituals that helped an emperor face his day. A well-cooked breakfast here is as powerful as a proclamation. You take a final stroll past the spice storehouse, inhaling the mingled scents of ginger, star anise, peppercorn, and dried mandarin peel. Someone is pounding rice in the distance. A child's laughter breaks the stillness, one of the concubine's sons, perhaps chasing butterflies before being called to calligraphy drills. Even in a palace of rigid schedules, breakfast has left a softness in the air. And somewhere, just past the golden courtyard and beneath the tapestry of clouds, a kitchen hand slumps onto a bench and sighs deeply. He has folded a leftover sweet bun into his sleeve. He'll eat it later when no one's looking. A small act of rebellion, A sacred moment of personal indulgence. You can relate. After all, you're still carrying a piece of ginger candy in your own sleeve. You weren't supposed to take it, but it was warm and sticky and smelled like childhood. So you slipped it in just before the servers cleared the table. Call it dessert, call it a keepsake, call it a reminder that in this massive, majestic machine called an empire, sometimes the smallest, sweetest details are the ones that stay with you. The palace is quieter now, resting in that post-breakfast lull before the machinery of empire picks up speed again. You walk through a stone courtyard dappled with leaf shadows, listening to the hush of palace life gently humming in the background, the scrape of sandals, the soft clink of porcelain being washed, the distant drone of scholarly debate. The air is warm but not heavy. Somewhere above, a crane lifts from the roof with a lazy flap, its wings slicing through the morning like slow scissors on silk. You find yourself wandering past the herb gardens again, though this time your pace is slower, more reflective. Maybe it's the residual calm from that pine mushroom soup, or maybe it's just that you're full, like completely and cosmically full, not just in the belly, but in the soul. You've tasted the finest of what the Emperor's table offers, and somehow it's made the sky seem a little wider, the stone under your feet a bit warmer. You pass an old gardener kneeling in the dirt, trimming mint and plucking stray weeds. He doesn't look up, but he murmurs something in a voice like paper. Even emperors must begin their day with something small. You nod, not sure if he's speaking to you or the soil. Probably both. There's a kind of magic to that. All. The ceremony, the politics, the dynastic weight of history, and it all starts with a spoonful of something warm, a bowl of something humble. Not a banquet, not a proclamation, but breakfast. Historians still argue whether this daily meal-shaped policy softened tempers or simply functioned as a performance of prosperity. But to you, it feels deeper than that. It's the Emperor whispering, to the Empire, I am here, I am nourished. All is in rhythm. Choose step beneath a carved lintel and find yourself once again in the corridor that leads toward the kitchens. Smoke is still curling from the clay stoves, though the frantic energy has faded. The chefs now sip tea in the courtyard, their white robes flecked with sauce, and their brows gleaming from heat and success. You catch a few of them exchanging sleepy grins. One holds up a crab shell triumphantly, like a trophy. Another mimics the Emperor's quiet nod of approval and gets a laugh. And then you remember somewhere behind those stoves, in a locked cedar chest, is the day's official breakfast scroll. Its ink barely dry. It now joins thousands of others. In the food archive, a kind of gastronomic journal stretching across dynasties, bare. You could find the very morning when an emperor refused dumplings in favor of pickled radish, and the nation speculated wildly for weeks. Was it a change in political winds, or just a sore tooth? The scholars will never agree, and maybe that's part of the charm. Your path curves again. And this time you're approaching the hall of still waters, a reflective garden lined with pebble paths and pale lotus blossoms. You step onto a footbridge and pause at the top, looking down into the water. Your own reflection stares back at you, a little more wrinkled from steam, maybe, but a lot more at peace. You think about the flavors that will stay with you: tartness of plum, the quiet strength of ginger, the cloud-like softness of mung bean cakes. But mostly, you think of the quiet moments, the single breath before the emperor lifted his spoon, the way the servants waited not for praise, but for peace. And here, at the edge of this palace morning, it all settles. You, the food, the empire itself. Everything slow, everything soft, everything somehow exactly where it needs to be. So now, you let yourself slow completely. You linger on the last spoonful, the final hint of warmth on your tongue, the ghost of ginger and honey gently trailing through your memory like the tail end of a dream. Your breath grows softer, slower. The palace drifts into the background now, its white walls blurred by a light fog rolling in from the eastern hills. Even the birds have quieted. You sit by the water. Or maybe you just imagine. You do. The ripples are steady. The sky is pale, passes beneath the lily pads. And nothing seems urgent anymore. Not the emperor's preferences, not the scribe's scroll, not even the story you've just been told. All of it folds into stillness, like parchment laid flat beneath it. Sleep in hand, this moment, this small, quiet, exhales yours. You don't need a royal banquet. You don't need gold chopsticks or tea brewed from rain caught on mountain blossoms. You just need the memory of calm, of gentleness, of something warm meeting your hunger with grace. Let the flavors blur now. Let the clamor of history dissolve like sugar in hot water. Let your breath rise and fall like a bamboo curtain in the breeze. You're not walking anymore. You're resting. The emperor is gone. The palace is silent. But breakfast lingers in the soul. And now, finally, you can sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.